Hi everyone, this is Ellen from Astrology Journal. I want to take a look at the Capricorn new moon chart. That's what this chart is. We are having a Capricorn new moon on December 30th at 5:27 Eastern Standard Time, 5:27 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This chart, the basic theme that I see in this chart is upping our level in terms of our gifts and talents and our skill development and all of that. And then I also see this as kind of a continuation or sort of the next leg in the journey of what I was talking about in the Gemini full moon chart, this idea of skill development and the importance of skill in terms of maintaining and sustaining our light. And also I see it, this lunation cycle in particular, is really connected to the Mars retrograde cycle that's going on right now. The midpoint of that cycle is on January 15th or 16th. I can't remember the exact date. And the full moon for this lunation is on January 13th, so just a couple days before. And if you read my article on the Mars retrograde cycle, I talked about coming up sort of being faced by a challenge at that midpoint. The idea, the Sabian symbol being a storm and a canyon. So this idea of having to navigate a challenge, some challenge, an inner challenge coming up, and if we resolve that, some sort of outer challenge we've been having might also resolve. And I use the analogy of the movie Iron Will to kind of convey this idea. And so I think that's relevant here. And it feels like the challenge might be something to do with upping our skill levels, upping our levels in terms of whatever gifts and talents we naturally have within us, or upping our skill level relative to a dream that we might have. Saturn is in Pisces here. Pisces is dream. Saturn, ruler of Capricorn, is this idea of mastery. It's really about bringing the dream down to reality. And Capricorn is part of this Earth trine, and Virgo is the second Earth sign, and this is about developing the skills and practice. The root, you could say, of Capricorn in terms of the Earth triplicity is Taurus. That's our gifts and our talents. That's the soil, the resources that we have inborn in us. Then we move on to Virgo, and we develop those by learning the gifts, the skills, and the practices around those. And then we go into Capricorn and we develop mastery, So that's kind of the idea that I see. You can see in this chart, there are two patterns. Neither of these patterns are official patterns, but they still seem really relevant to me. This one with all the green lines, well, the green line and then the orange opposition, this looks like a kite pattern. It looks like a kite. It is not the official kite pattern that people typically talk about when they are talking about kite patterns in charts. That kite pattern, the official one, is made up of grand trines and two sextiles. So the grand trine forms the body, and that's not what this is, but I'm just showing you the body. The grand trine forms the body, and then the two sextiles kind of go off of one of those trines, and they form the head of the kite. So what we have in this kite pattern, we have two sextiles here forming the V shape of the kite, and a square completing the body of the kite and laying the foundation for the top of the kite, and the top of the kite is made by two semi-squares. So all of these aspects align with a phase shift on the wheel. So the phase shifts are represented by these lines here. So this is the new phase, this is the crescent phase, so this is a shift from the balsamic. So this is a shift from the balsamic phase to the new phase. It starts the new phase. This is a shift from the crescent phase to the from the new phase to the crescent phase. This starts the crescent phase. Here we have the shift from the crescent phase to the first quarter phase. This starts the first quarter phase, etc. The sesquiquadrate, I talked a lot about this in the video recording I did for the full moon chart, the Gemini full moon chart. So I think that was the last post that I put up. This sesquiquadrate, both of these are waxing sesquiquadrates. We'll look a little more closely at that in a minute, but that waxing sesquiquadrate falls here at 15 degrees of Leo. So this is where the first quarter phase ends and the gibbous phase begins. So this is a shift between the first quarter phase and the gibbous phase. The gibbous phase, you can see that Virgo completely falls within the gibbous phase, and this phase is very Virgoan in nature. It really is about developing our gifts and talents. It's about learning the skills and the practices that we need to learn to develop our gifts and talents. We're given the raw materials and resources. What we do with those is up to us, and one of the things that we can do with them is learn the skills and practices of them. And if we learn the skills and practices of them, we can then go on to mastery. But learning the skills and practices isn't just a one and done kind of thing. It's like there's always nuances of our gifts and talents that we can explore and get to know. And there are those parts of our gifts and our natural talents and gifts that we're particularly good at, and they're easier for us to develop, and those that are perhaps a little more challenging and not so easy for us to develop. And it may be that either we're just good at something, and so we haven't really taken the time to learn a gift and talent, and so we haven't really developed our potential as high as we could, or that we have developed our potential there, but that there might be other aspects of our gifts and talents that maybe don't come so easily to us, and maybe the challenge is to kind of look at those and start to tackle those. So the sense that I get, and this is really based on my own life, is like this pattern perhaps of having walking up to this challenge and maybe dabbling in it a little bit, but then kind of walking back away, and then maybe walking up to it again and dabbling perhaps a little bit more and maybe a little further, but then walking away again, and then walking up to it, and dabbling a little bit and then walking away. And so that's the pattern that I'm seeing in my life, and that I think is relevant to this chart. And so it may be that the energies are supporting us in meeting that challenge and really walking up to it, looking it in the eye and saying, okay, I'm going to do this, right? And I think it is really relevant to a dream or something that we really would like to bring into reality, to bring down into reality. So first let's look at what's going on in this kite pattern. So we have Saturn here in a sesquiquadrate with Mars. This is a waxing sesquiquadrate because Saturn moves more slowly than Mars. So we sort of put a pin in that and we move around to Mars forward in zodiacal order, as they say, or counterclockwise through the chart, to find Mars. And we find that Mars hasn't yet reached the halfway point relative to Saturn. So Saturn's at 14 degrees of Pisces. The halfway point would be 14 degrees of Virgo. Mars isn't there yet. So this is a waxing sesquiquadrate. And then the other sesquiquadrate, so here's Mars, and it's in a sesquiquadrate with Mercury. Mars moves more slowly than Mercury, so we put a pin in Mars and we go around, count around until we get to Mercury, and we can see that Mercury has not yet reached its halfway point with Mars. So the halfway point of Mars is at 2 degrees of Leo, 2 degrees of Aquarius would be the halfway point. Mercury hasn't gotten there yet. So this is a waxing sesquiquadrate. And so those are both Virgo, gibbous. They fall here at 15 degrees of Leo. Those are gibbous in nature. So this idea of skill development and practice. And by the way, this is how we develop humility. Mercury is in Sagittarius. Fire signs are not necessarily humble. That might not be the thing you would most think about when you think about fire signs. And so Mercury in Sagittarius, it's really by developing skills that we kind of become humble, because we start to, and also I would say appreciative, which would be a Sagittarian kind of a thing. So skill development, I think, is really important in terms of our spiritual development. And Virgo is opposite of Pisces. Virgo is the body and the mind, and so it's this idea of being the vessel. Virgo represents the vessel for our spirit, and by developing our gifts and talents, by learning the skills and practices of them, we can channel our energy, our spirit through our gifts and talents because we've developed the practices and skills of them, if that makes sense. And that also allows us to sustain our light. So here in Leo, we're expressing our light, but we need to learn how to bring that into practical purpose and to sustain it over the long term. And that's what my personal take on Virgo is that's part of what Virgo is about also. So a lot of sesquiquadrate energy, and again, I talked a lot about the sesquiquadrate in the last video that I did on the Gemini full moon. So then this square is a waning square. So the final part of this triangle part of the kite is this square pattern, and this is a waning square. So it's made up of Saturn here and Mercury here. And Saturn moves more slowly than Mercury. So if we go around the chart until we get to Mercury, we see that we're well past the halfway point in terms of where that halfway point. So if Saturn's at 14 degrees of Pisces, halfway point here would be 14 degrees of Virgo, and Mercury has gone well past that. And then we know that these are about 90 degrees apart. They're not exactly 90 degrees apart, but they're 90 degrees-ish apart within orb. That's a square. So we know that it's a waning square, not a waxing square. If Mercury was down around here, that would be a waxing square. So we actually see a waxing square between Saturn and Jupiter. Saturn moves more slowly than Jupiter. We count around, we get to Jupiter. That's a waxing square, so 30, 60, 90. So I hope that makes sense. So we have here a waning square, and if we count backwards around the wheel, 90 degrees, 30, 60, 90, we get to 0 degrees of Capricorn. That's just a shorthand for, instead of counting 270 degrees going all the way around this way, if the circle is 360 degrees and a square is 90 degrees, if we subtract 90 from 360, we get to 270. So if we go around to 270, we get to 0 degrees of Capricorn, but we can also just count backwards through the wheel, and that also brings us to 0 degrees of Capricorn. So this waning square is Capricornian in nature, so there's this idea of mastery. And also this idea of scarcity. So we may find that we can't do something. Maybe the reason we finally are just like, okay, I'm going to do this is because we realize there's something really matters to us, Capricorn, that really matters to us that we can't do because there's some skill, some practice that we need to implement that we haven't been able to implement, or that we haven't felt empowered to implement, perhaps. We just, for some reason, haven't been able to do it. We haven't been able to muster it. And I think the energies are supporting us in mustering that. Hi, I'm stepping in after the fact. I wanted to add another dimension to what I was saying. Empowerment doesn't fully capture what I was trying to get at. So empowerment is part of this pattern because we have Pluto here, and Pluto, we can say, is about empowerment. But there's also this idea of belief. We have Mercury in Sagittarius, this idea of belief, and it's in a sesquiquadrate with Mars. And we can think of, so we have the whole fire sign, or the fire element, triplicity, present here. So we have Mars, which rules Aries. So Mars is a significant player. And then Mars itself is in Leo. So Aries, the first fire sign, Leo, the second fire sign. And then Sagittarius, the third fire sign, is involved in this also. And we can sort of think of Sagittarius as the culmination of Aries and Leo. It's a final fire sign. So Aries is about I am, who am I? So we discover who we are, and then we learn to express ourselves. and then we maybe get some experience in life or whatever, and we learn to believe in ourselves. And so I think that's that self-belief may be the thing that allows us to go up to this edge one more time and actually go and really not just dabble, but actually go forward in this direction of learning whatever skill or tool or talent or I'm sorry, or practice or whatever that we need to be able to bring our dreams into reality. And belief in ourselves is really interesting, right? Because we also have Saturn in this pattern. And I know that I was raised in an environment where it wasn't okay to think well of yourself or to think too much of yourself. And so to belong, to be part of a community, you kind of had to learn to keep yourself in check, to keep yourself down. And I think that, there's something to be said about that in terms of humility. But if it's false humility, if it's actually harming yourself, that's not real humility. That's humiliation perhaps, or that's sort of the negative expression of Virgo. I think that true humility is developed when we really start to recognize that we've been given these gifts, and that so that's one part of sort of coming into alignment with humility, genuine humility, self-affirming humility, not self-denying or self-denigrating humility. And then I think another piece of it is when we actually step in and start to learn the skills and talent practices and do the practices, that also kind of inculcates another layer of humility, and it sort of imbues us with appreciation, which I would say is a Sagittarian theme actually, but imbues us with appreciation also, or perhaps as a seed from which appreciation can start to develop. So Virgo is a mutable sign, and Sagittarius is the next mutable sign. So perhaps we can see the mutability unfolding in that way from Virgo, the seed, the practice being the seed that gives rise to appreciation, and all that being part of humility. So Saturn in Pisces, we may need to be releasing some old norms that have been about keeping ourselves down. And remember that Jupiter, Pisces and Sagittarius are related in traditional astrology because they're both ruled by Jupiter. So there is something to be said about belief, Saturn in Pisces also having something to do with belief in ourselves. So anyway, that is, so I wanted to step in and talk about that. So again, this idea of empowerment, Pluto here as part of at the point of the kite pattern, but then also this idea of belief in ourselves, and belief in ourselves being from a daily perspective, being what gives rise to empowerment. So it may be that we have enough belief in ourselves, that something has shifted enough, that we have enough belief in ourselves, we've done enough healing work, we've come far enough that we have just enough belief in ourselves, or more than just enough belief in ourselves, to be able to believe in our dream, believe that Sagittarius, believe in our dreams such that we can go ahead and do the challenging things, the mundane, day-to-day skill type things that we need to develop, that we perhaps felt too daunting, too overwhelming, too much before. We couldn't do it. And that we now, the energies, in my view, the energies are always supporting us. The question is, are we able to step into that support in a way? I like to think developmentally, so we can think of this as a developmental challenge that we've kept coming up to. Here's the transition point, the gibbous. We keep coming up to this challenge, and perhaps we've walked back, and to the extent that we've done it and walked back from it, done it and walked back from it. I mean, done it meaning walking up to it, but not actually succeeding at it, and then walking away, then we can say that there's been a developmental challenge, that we haven't had what we've needed to be able to kind of rise to the challenge of it. But perhaps we have enough self-belief that we can do that. We can make the case, and this is contrary to anything that I learned, that the energies are always supporting us. And the question is, so the energies, meaning in the cosmos and that sort of thing, are always supporting us. But then there's sort of the inner development that hinges some on, how we've been raised. And so have we had the support to develop, in terms of our human development, to be able to reach this point where we can rise to the challenge that's there? The energies will support us in that challenge, but we also have to have that inner development to be able to make it to and through that challenge. So that's kind of how I've been thinking about it. So I thought I would just share that. And I feel like, that a lot of us have been doing a whole lot of work, and perhaps we are feeling like we have, we have realized a greater level of self-belief that will be able to kind of broach this edge and go beyond it where we hadn't been able to before. So that is what I wanted to say here, and I'll just go back to what I was saying before. So it may seem a little disjointed, but hopefully it'll all come together and make sense. And again, Saturn, ruler of Capricorn, here in Pisces, relevant to some sort of dream that we've had perhaps for a long time. Saturn, kind of age, old, something perhaps we've had for a long time. And letting go of strictures or restraints, inner restraints perhaps that have kept us from doing that. Now, and perhaps that's the challenge. Perhaps it's that restraint, that's something that we've been. Pisces has to do with self-undoing. So some sort of habit or pattern, and perhaps psychological habit or pattern that we've been, running, and we keep getting up to this point, and it's like, nope, can't do it. And perhaps perhaps the energies, and I think the energies are supporting us and shifting from that. And by the way, I just want to mention, Erin Reese posted a practice recently where she had created a practice to help us sort of disattach from any roles that we've been really attached to that perhaps aren't right for us right now or whatever. But anyway, I found it a really helpful practice, and I think it is relevant to this chart. So what I'll do is I'll put a link to it in the show notes because it might be a helpful practice for others at this time. Mars has to do with I am, who am I? Saturn has to do with the roles and the expectations. So if Mars is who we just are, and Leo is about this is how I express my light, this is the raw expression of my light, it's just uninhibited, it is who I am. Saturn is more like, this is who I'm supposed to be. This is what the role I'm expected to play. This is what other people, say has to be true for me. This is how, if I adopt this rule, this will allow me to belong in the status quo, in the society as it is. And to the extent that these expectations and roles and etc. are out of alignment with who we really are and the natural expression of our light, to the extent that these are inhibiting our natural expression of light, then these are, the energies are sort of saying, okay, it's time, we can let go of those now. It's time to let go of those. So I think anything that we can, any helpful, healthy practice that we can do that can help us with that, this might be a good time to do it. So anyway, so that's kind of what I see about, and by the way, I forgot, the point of this kite is Pluto. And so that's the evolution of our soul. In evolutionary astrology, Pluto is evolution. It's also our soul, so the evolution of our soul. And so it potentially, this idea of, really, really sort of tackling this skill, this practice, this whatever it is, perhaps this is a thing that will help us to evolve as souls, as beings in this, through our human forms. So this other pattern is also an unofficial pattern. It looks like a yod, but it's not a yod. So yod is made up of two inconjuncts or 150 degree aspects, And then I think it's a sextile here. But that's not what this is. This is made up of 2 keen deciles, which are 165 degrees, and one, I think this is a decile. So a decile is 360 degrees divided by 10. That gives you 36. So 36 degrees is the decile. And 36 times 2 is 72, and that's the quintile. So the decile is part of the quintile pattern, and the quintile also has to do with our gifts and our talents. And it's interesting because this leg of the quintile and also of this keen decile is Chiron, the wounded healer in Aries. I am. Who am I? Will, courage. If we don't know who we are, it's very difficult to exercise will and courage. If we've been spending all of our lives pleasing this south node, so this not yod pattern, this keen decile pattern, this keen decile triangle, it points to the south node in Libra. So Libra can be, pleasing. We're too eager to please. And in being that way, we can potentially lose touch with, our own sense of I am, and the courage and the will that comes from that, naturally arises from that. But there is this. There's this decile aspect here between Saturn and Chiron. So this idea that they're connected in some way, and so perhaps if the negative, the wounded manifestation is seeding who we are to please others, to fit into roles, etc., perhaps the positive side of this is mapping our dreams to who we are, and mapping our structures, our inner structures, to who we feel ourselves to be, to who we sense and know ourselves to be. And so then that becomes a way to tap into, our gifts and our talents, that sort of thing. I don't think I said that very well at all. I'm sort of finding my way to it. But the idea is that there can be a wounded expression of any aspect, but then there's also the healed expression of any aspect, the whole expression of any aspect. And my thinking is that if we understand what the whole expression or the healed expression is, that might help us navigate from the wound to the whole, might give us context for what the wound is, so that we can better understand the wound and help to heal it. So that's kind of my thinking. So thinking about this idea of a decile and this Saturn and Chiron, that becomes worth thinking about in terms of a healthy expression versus the negative expression, the wounded expression that we may be facing right now. So the decile is 36 degrees, and if we count 36 degrees on the wheel, that brings us to 6 degrees of Taurus, and Taurus is ruled by Venus. And so Taurus is our gifts and our talents. And so perhaps that's specifically what this is about. It's interesting because the actual quintile is 72 degrees, and that's 30, 60, 72. So that lands us at 12 degrees of Gemini. That's the next step. And that's ruled by Mercury. And this is Gemini and Mercury. That's that idea of curiosities. But first, we have to sort of identify, name, feel into, learn, discern what our gifts and talents are. What do we like? What feels good? So we have natural gifts and talents, but then there's also the question: do I like this? Do I like this better? Some of us might have lots of gifts and talents. Well, then the question is, what do we actually like? And it may also be that we like something that we don't have as natural a talent for, but that we like that so much that we prioritize that. And that's okay too, right? But then the next step is to get curious about it. So anyway, that's just getting a little off the beaten path there. The keen deciles, I've talked a lot about this aspect. The way that I see it is this idea of pressure. And so I think of if you look up quintessals, you'll come across this thing called fatal in the natal, and they also call it bandit in the transit. I'm not entirely sure what bandit in the transit means, but the idea of fatal in the natal I think of as like obsessive compulsive. And so I would say that that is a dysfunctional or distorted version or expression of the quintessal. But if we look at what obsession compulsion is, it's kind of pressure. And so the idea that pressure is here to help us. And the example I use is a baby going through the birth canal. So the baby it gets, the contractions put pressure on the baby, and by putting pressure on the baby, it helps the baby prepare for the new environment. It squeezes the water out of its lungs, and it prepares it for the new environment. So that's a positive aspect of pressure. And so this idea of pressure helping us perhaps to let go of what's out of balance in us. So what might be out of balance is this tendency, this very normal human tendency to conform, to meet expectations so that we can belong. And that's okay, except if it makes us too out of balance, if it's too discordant with who we really are. And we have to bring back the balance if that's the case. So I think that's what I have to say about this chart. I hope there was something useful or helpful. I feel like it's a lot of the same story. It's just and it's just I think the energies are always supporting us. So the energies are just sort of coming together in these different aspects to support us in subtly different ways. And so that's what I think is happening. That's what I think is happening here. So I think I'll just leave it at that. I think I'll leave it at that. I hope there was something helpful for you here. Okay, that's all. Take care. Bye.